Well, good evening. Welcome to another midweek study with Bradford Christian College, producing the episode, the midweek podcast. This is episode number 4 in our Christianity, a National Law series, and we will get ourselves into that in just a moment. First of all, let me just remind you of our sponsor, Bradford Christian College. Bradford Christian College, you'll see the link to their website in the description below. It's an online Christian college. It provides a number of bachelor degrees and also a Master of Arts in Theological Studies. It is an online program, but you're not alone in that program. A mentor is assigned to each student, and that mentor will help the student walk with the student through their program, challenging the student with additional questions and conversation, discussion in live meetings, being available to answer questions that students might have regarding content, readings, applications, and such. So we believe it really is a program that's intentionally designed to be helpful to those students who enter into a rigorous program of study, which we believe Bradford Christian College to be, and have the coaching, the mentoring that is needed to help somebody um, stay on course, keep on track, and get their program completed. Something else that I want to say is this is Thanksgiving week, and hopefully um, uh, you're having a good Thanksgiving week and have a special Thanksgiving Day planned, you and your family, and remembering to whom and why we have a Thanksgiving Day. You can watch for a post from Random Cast. Random Cast will not have its usual Friday podcast this week because of the Thanksgiving Day weekend, but you can watch for a special post from Random Cast. I think it shows up tomorrow, related to Thanksgiving Day. So please watch for that and give it a view and like it and share it and all that sort of thing. But so this Friday, no Random Cast podcast. Random Cast will return next Friday. And next week, in addition, all of our regular podcasts during the week, the Tuesday night Lanterns Quest. Lanterns Quest had a great time this week in its podcast. It's every once in a while, Lanterns Quest does a reaction time, and that was this week. Please go view that video if you haven't seen it yet. I think it was a good discussion regarding some matters with specifically the ELCA Church, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and an adopted statement that they have recently approved and served as the basis for, I think, some really good discussion. Next week, Lanterns Quest on Tuesday. Back to the Gospel of Mark as we're walking through the Gospel of Mark, exploring the sketchbook of Christ is what we call that. Next Wednesday will be our midweek study again. And then on Friday, Random Cast will be back with its regular offering of random things, I guess you could say. But now, don't get angry with me if this doesn't work out. But we're working on a Monday podcast, and I think it's going to be ready to go this Monday. Maybe not. It might need to wait another week, but watch for it. Okay, just watch for a Monday podcast. Right now, the title is History Done Right. History Done Right. And the idea of the podcast is, well, I kind of borrows from what I heard a pastor say once about theology. He said theology is kind of like a button-down shirt. If you don't get that first button in correctly, then all the buttons are going to be off, right? And I think that you could say the same thing about doing history and understanding history. If you don't get off to the right start, with history, then everything's going to be off in history. And the thing is, you can be studying and learning true things, but if you don't have the proper starting point of history and you don't have that squared away, it really does change how um, history is viewed at various points. And so that's one of the things that that podcast wants to do, and that's why you want to start um, with that podcast right from the beginning, because it's going to get that first button in the right buttonhole, and then it's going to move through history from there very slowly. Um, I'm sure we tend to do things slowly here, as you know from our midweek study, as we're still working through our election sermon, and we'll continue that tonight. But the plan will be to do our best with history done right, to establish that first buttonhole and get it right, and have a right view from the beginning of history, not just from the beginning of our study of history, but the beginning of history itself, how history really begins, and then moving through history there. And our effort's going to be to take readings from a variety of sources, mostly older sources, especially when we're doing older history, um, and to get a broad taste of some wonderful expressions of historical truths through those combinations of readings. So that'll be hopefully starting this next Monday, but don't get angry with me and abandon me if we don't get history done right started this coming Monday and it ends up being a week later. But watch for it. Watch for it. Hopefully, this coming Monday, whatever number that is, uh, around the corner here of Thanksgiving weekend. Okay, um, let's get to our topic for tonight. And remember, well, remember if you've viewed the previous or listened to the previous podcast. If this is your first time listening, then you wouldn't necessarily remember this, and I'll need to remind you, or not remind you, but tell you about this. Um, um, but we've been looking at this election sermon from 1874. And this is, notice what it says here, an election sermon preached before the executive and legislative departments of the government of Massachusetts. All right, so this was preached on January 7th of 1874. Our pastor is Richard Gleason Green, and his topic is, or sermon title is, Christianity and National Law. And here he is instructing those elected to office on the previous election in 1873 and taking office in January of 1874. And he is instructing them in things that it is necessary for them to know to be those who rule in the fear of God, as was intended for all rulers in this nation. Okay, that was the idea that uh, those who were elected to office, in fact, about this time, um, it was expressed about 1874. It was expressed that it was inconceivable that Americans would elect somebody who's not a Christian to office, precisely because they understood that Christianity is the national law, that this is a Christian nation, it's going to behave in a Christian way. Um, it's going to have laws that are rooted in Christianity, not necessarily laws that are Bible verses, but laws who can find their basis in the scriptural principles um, that we receive from Scripture. Okay, so at this point, we're nearing the end. I think we're about page 34 in this 52-page document. So we're nearing the end, but I think maybe I'll go to about page 31 here. Let's see if I got it right. Um, I didn't. This is before this. That was objection 2. So he came to the point of his sermon where he is going to take up the anticipated objections of those who would be opposed to his thesis that Christianity is to be the national law. This is to be a nation that embraces Christianity as its national law, and that the administration of its government should be grounded in Christianity. And that is not to say that the government is to say that, at least the national government is not to say that the Baptist Church will be the Church of America or the Presbyterian Church or what have you, whatever denomination you would fill the blank in. That's not the point. The point is that the laws and the policies of this nation are expected to be presented in such a way as to favor the practice and availability of Christianity in the communities. Right? And so this can be seen in things like no businesses open on Sunday laws, blue laws, or whatever they call them, right? Why? Why no businesses open on Sunday? Because the government is to be favoring Christianity, Sunday being the day of worship for Christianity, and by not allowing any businesses to be open that day, it gives opportunity for people to go to church and not have to go to work, or not to be distracted away from church by businesses that are open, the pool hall, the saloon, or whatever, the movie theater, whatever. It's like it would be like there's nowhere else to go. People are going to church on Sunday, so I'll go to church on Sunday. Okay. Now, that doesn't make somebody a Christian. It doesn't force anybody to be a Christian. What it does is it gives place and opportunity for that basic Christian principle to be practiced, going to church on Sunday. Separating oneself from the regular cares of the world. Now, for those who are living in the country and they are practicing some false religion, the Jew, the Muslim, what have you, and their day of worship is a different day of the week than Sunday, well, nobody's going to stop you from that day as far as going to your synagogue or whatever. But don't expect the laws of this Christian nation to be manipulated to show favoritism towards your false religion, right? Don't expect the laws of this Christian nation to allow for businesses to be open on Sunday, because there's some people that they don't worship on Sunday, and so we shouldn't be discriminated against them. It's not a question of discrimination. It's a question of the integrity of our policies and our practices to be in line with that which we have embraced and as the basis of this country, and that's Christianity. Okay, so he takes up the objections. Objection number 1, individuals may have Christianity and the nation may have it without giving it any recognized legal administration. Okay, and the author says, no, you can't do that. You can't profess Christianity and not live Christianity. As I wrote in the margin over here, faith without works, right? That's the author's argument here, faith without works. And you can't have that. This is a no-go. All right. Because if you're going to insist that there's no recognized legal administration of Christianity, then you are asserting that there is no Christianity being embraced in this nation. Okay, because what he's arguing is that the government that's established is an outgrowth of the faith, the religion that is embraced by the people who established the government. And this is a great quote here. The world has seen enough of that modest Christianity, which is either afraid or ashamed to declare itself by its own proper name at all points where it might reasonably be inquired of. Yeah, imagine that in 1874 he's saying this modest Christianity has got to stop. Right? We need a boldness, a humble boldness, in the marketplace of ideas, in the political arena, that is not ashamed to assert that the reason why we are recommending this particular policy is precisely because we are a Christian nation, or the reason why we are advocating against this particular policy is precisely because we are a Christian nation. Okay, so then objection 2 was it is not in the province of government to deal officially with religion. And so this one, as I recall our discussion of this objection, and if you don't know about our discussion, go watch the previous video or listen to the previous podcast to catch up on that discussion. This one represents honestly, some of the challenges of putting this into practice, that it can become at points very difficult to ensure that a government is operating from a Christian basis, without where can I find a good example of it? Yeah, without going too far, without entering the priestly realm of, the priest as head of the church. And maybe I shouldn't use the word priest. I'm just thinking of the Old Testament scenario of the king and the priest, and they're separate in their functions, but the priest is very much concerned regarding the life and conduct of the king, whether it be personally or politically. The priest is very much concerned about it. The priest does very much act as the conscience of the king in those regards. Objection number 3, but Christ and his apostles made no attempt to bring Christianity into civil administration. Okay, so this is the classic, I think we could call this the argument from silence, right? Well, Jesus didn't say anything about it, so and I think the pastor here does a wonderful job countering this with, well, they didn't make any attempt to bring into civil administration the care of the unfortunate, to establish orphan asylums or insane retreats. I mean, Jesus spoke to the people about their obligations to care for the poor, right? To receive the children, right? He didn't he didn't go to the political leaders and say, now, come on, you need to get a political program in place to take care of these. No, he spoke to his people. You could say he spoke to the church to be engaged in this effort. Okay, and so I think we're now on objection 4. That's where we want to start tonight. So let's pick up here at objection 4. Any civil legal administration of Christianity is unsafe for Christianity itself. It is even injurious to Christianity. Okay, that's an interesting objection. Any civil legal administration of Christianity is unsafe for Christianity itself. It is even injurious to Christianity. All right, so our pastor says it is pleasant to see men so careful of Christianity. And it may be granted that in the majority of cases, the fears for it are sincere. But do not these fears arise from the old historical confusing of Christianity with ecclesiasticism? Okay, so that's interesting. Like, um, I wonder if when they're saying ecclesiasticism here, if um, they're saying something like religion. Ecclesiastic, Webster's 1828 apparently doesn't have the word ecclesiasticism. Ecclesiastic or ecclesiastical is defined as pertaining or relating to the church as ecclesiastical discipline or government, ecclesiastical affairs. Right. So if this is relating to the government of the church, yeah, we don't want the civil government um, messing around in the government of the church. That's jurisdiction violation. Let's read on. Shall we be anxious in behalf of a divine force, lest it be unable to bear the strain which might come upon it if set at work? Shall we be anxious in behalf of a divine force, lest it be unable to bear the strain which might come upon it if set at work? Okay, so that's an interesting sentence, right? Because if it's truly a divine force, right, isn't kind of the nature of things that are divine that they can actually, they're fine, they can do the work that they're set to do, right? Like, is the Lord's arm too short, right? That he needs the assistance of men to do. Okay, looks like he's going to go to an analogy here. Let's see if this helps us. If the law of gravitation is to be cautiously held in reserve from working and omitted from our scientific recognition, lest it come under misapprehension and fall into entangling alliances with the laws of electrical force, then we may omit from our ethical and governmental science the principle and precept of the Son of God. And so I think that what he's setting up here is something that you would never do. I don't know what they do in science today. It's it's kind of forth into its own mystical field, it would seem. But um, I don't think you would ever find yourself in a scientific laboratory somewhere and there's discussion going on about whatever experiment's happening, and somebody, whoa, let's not do too much with the law of gravity here because we don't want it to get entangled with the laws of electrical force and get into some kind of a problem there. Let's continue. We may be very sure that the world will ultimately omit with contempt anything that cannot or will not or must not work. Those friends of Christianity who are for hiding it in sanctuaries, secluded from the strain and noise of public and social affairs, or for shutting it out from its full development on any field of man's interest and activity, know not what they do. Okay, so that's a pretty cool sentence right there. I think I may take to highlighting here. Those friends of Christianity who are for hiding it in sanctuaries, hiding Christianity in sanctuaries, secluded from the strain and noise of public and social affairs, or for shutting it out from its full development on any field of man's interest and activity, know not what they do. Yeah. So those who are acting the part of the protector of Christianity by saying, well, let's not bring Christianity into this discussion, into this arena. They know not what they do. Okay. Now, um, the phraseology there is interesting because um, the the one well-known historical moment where those words are used are when Jesus is on the cross. They know not what they do. And I'm guessing that our pastor chose those words intentionally, meaningfully, thoughtfully. Then notice what he says next. They in effect confess its weakness and invite for it oblivion. See, now this is really interesting, because it would seem here that our pastor is suggesting that the vigor and strength of Christianity is to be released and engaged in the various arenas of life, and that withholding it brings it to nothing in terms of its effect, in terms of it accomplishing what it's intended to accomplish. Withholding it is the salt losing its savor. For myself, this is the pastor speaking, I beg to put myself on record as standing amazed at the modern argument, often so skillful and eloquent and evidently sincere, with which brilliant Christian preachers and noble Christian journals seek to protect that Christianity which, instead of needing defense, okay, now let's get on leaning forward in our chairs here, and let's be paying attention here, because I have a sense that our pastor is going to a wonderful place here. Let's see if it pans out here. Which, instead of needing defense, is itself the gigantic protector carrying through age after age, human society, government, institution, law, and the whole soul of our race in its mighty arms as a father carries his child. You know, it's a great and wonderful moment when you're walking the trail and your little one is, plodding along on the trail, and then he or she reaches out his arms. Daddy, carry me. And dad is happy. Dad is fulfilled. Dad is in his lane. Dad is doing his thing, carrying his child. See, and our pastor here is reminding us that Christianity is not this, fragile thing that we have to keep hidden and don't let it out because it's going to break and shatter and then we won't have it anymore. Um, Christianity is not benefited by my defending it. I'm protected by the release of Christianity. Like the assertion, the presence of Christianity in whatever arena. It's not people, individuals, or really smart people, or really rich people, or really powerful people, or just the common Joe that has carried human society and government and institution and law and the whole soul of our race. The reason why history and culture, community and government and law came to the place it came to at the time of the founding of this country is precisely because Christianity was released and having its influence. Yeah, I need to be mindful of the truth that sometimes, maybe most times, it is enough to let the Bible speak. The Bible doesn't need me explaining it to defend it. Let God's word stand. Let it be the sword that pierces the conscience and the hearts of men. And let it do its job. Let it be the protector, right? We don't need to be embarrassed by it and ashamed of it, right? When when the Bible asserts that he who does not work shall not eat, yeah, There's a policy for us. If you do not work, you shall not eat. I I understand that hunger is a great motivator. Somebody who is in a condition of having nothing, um, that's a moment when they can be greatly motivated to begin to work so they can have something, right? Now, um, there are additional policies that need to support this idea of he who does not work shall not eat, right? There need to be policies in place that allow for individuals to enjoy the fruit of their labor, right? And that fruit is not stolen from them or taken from them through taxation or heavy taxation, and certainly not through the what Henry Hazlitt calls the most pernicious of taxes, inflation. It steals our money and we don't even know it, right? Government caused inflation because governments continues to increase the money supply, steals our money, and we don't notice it because our balance in our bank account doesn't change because of it. In fact, in some instances, precisely because of the increase in the money supply, we actually see an increase in the number of dollars in our paycheck. And yet we're still losing because the power of those dollars is being sucked out through inflation. And so we can actually live in a circumstance where I've never made so much money. And yet it is more difficult to pay for the things that you need to pay for. Um, put aside being a poor money manager, you could be a great money manager and still be struggling at that point because of inflation and the stealing of the fruit of your labor. And see, these are frustrations that work against operating according to a policy that, well, the Bible talks about. He who does not work shall not eat. And so what do? We steal, when I say we, I mean the collective government of our country. We steal the fruit of people's labor. And when they're in a situation where the stealing of that fruit or the circumstances around that are such that um, they are thoroughly frustrated by the loss of the fruit of their labor, and it's like, why try in that frustration? Then there's a government assistance program that allows them to not work, but eat through government handout. Um, and see, that kind of provision, the kind of blessing that comes to people, right? The blessing that comes to people and they realize, wow, this is beyond what I certainly deserve or what I earned, right? Those are blessings that we are to understand come from God. Um, but when government is giving those handouts, well, who's trying to be God in that situation? But I'm probably getting a far field from what our pastor is saying here. But look at his next question here. Will you protect the stars in their courses and the sun in its shining? No, we we don't need to defend the sun and what it's doing. Just let the sun rise, and everybody knows that's the sun. It brings light and warmth, and it doesn't bring. We don't need to block the sun or you know. Uh, I can't even believe that that's a people are thinking that that's a thing that we should do. Like like we're going to control nature. Like who do we think we are? Like are we going to speak to the winds and say peace be still and then they just or we're going to speak to the sun and sun dim your light and it will dim its light. It's like we're just silly to to not acknowledge that there's going to be unintended consequences to this and we just need to stop it. Okay, let the sun be. Let it do it. Let it do it. Let it do its thing. Let it shine and warm us, and we'll be fine. All right. If then it be asked, why do you demand any legal administration of Christianity if it be so well able to care for itself? That is the very question which it is good to answer. The answer is that such question is asked not so much for the sake of Christianity as for the sake of the government and for the nation. Salt is administered with food, not for the sake of the salt, for the sake of the food. Christianity can exist without this government. Okay, I got to get my marker here again. Christianity can exist without this government, but this government cannot nobly perpetuate itself without Christianity. Human law needs salt of divine grace. That's great. That's powerful. That's copy this down, stick it to your mirror so you see it every day and you're reminded. You know, this tells us why our government is in such distress and chaos and confusion and is so dysfunctional. Because it's abandoned the administration, the legal administration of Christianity. And that was its preservative. That was its salt. That was what gave it opportunity to nobly perpetuate itself. All right, we continue on. Returning to the objection, we find it in two divisions. One is that if a government have power to establish Christianity, then it will have an equal power to establish paganism or atheism or any anti-Christian system, and hereby it is asserted we open the door to danger. But the door of this danger is always open in this world. Certainly, if the people grow pagan or atheistical, they will have, or they will take, power to establish those systems, and they will have and will use the same power whether or not Christianity have previously been maintained. Moreover, we establish atheism when we exclude God. Moreover, we establish atheism when we exclude God. We do not object to laws against perjury as involving a concession to government of the right to meddle with the sacredness of the oath and therefore of the right to legalize perjury. We trust to men's common sense and common conscience and fearlessly go forward to use the law for such good ends as we may. You know, the argument that he's bringing up here is an often used argument, right? Like whatever political party is in power, they'll think about doing something. For example, I've heard this argument regarding the filibuster, so-called, in the Senate, which is not, it's misnamed. It's not a filibuster. But what they've taken the filibuster, what was traditionally known as the filibuster, which was, you know, a senator willing to take hold of the floor of the Senate and just continue talking and talking and thereby delaying a vote on some measure, right? But he's got to be on the floor. He's got to continue talking and continuing to hold the floor. He can't give up the floor at any moment, right? And so that filibuster requires some physical effort, right? Now, what they're calling the filibuster is this need for at least 60 votes for what's called cloture, I think it is, and that is a vote to end discussion, and then the legislation can be moved for a vote on the legislation itself. And so that's what they call a filibuster. Well, it's a lazy man's filibuster. Just saying, well, until we get 60 senators to vote that discussion is over, we're going to pretend like we're still having discussion, even though nobody's saying anything. So my point is to address this to what we're reading here from our pastor, that there are those who were saying, well, now the Republicans are in power, for example, and they want to get things done, they should end the filibuster, and then they can get things done. And then, some have suggested after they get the things done that they want to get done, then they can reinstitute the filibuster and reinstitute it in some particular way, that it can't be undone later, right? The idea being that, uh, if the Republicans were to end the filibuster and be able to get things passed they wanted to get passed, then put the filibuster back in place. Well, then when the Democrats come into control, they can end the filibuster and they can get things done they want to get done. They can put the filibuster back in place. But here's the thing: if something is right to do, um, it's right to do, and it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter that, well, if we do this, if we take some political and or legal action against some Democrat official that we see misbehaved in office, well, then when the Democrats get in power, they're just going to turn around and do the same thing. Well, um, the question should be whoever we're looking at to take political or legal action against, is it legitimate? Did they really, to the best of our knowledge, the best of our understanding, did they really violate some regulation, some rule, some law? Then you go after them for that. Um, and so, like the author says here, um, oh, look, if the government establishes Christianity as the religion, well, then when, there aren't Christians in the government or a majority of Christians, then they could establish atheism as the government. And yet that argument, as he points out, never comes up, like with perjury, that, if there are those in government who think that perjury is bad and they pass laws against it, when there are people in government that thinks it's good, they're going to pass laws in favor of perjury. Like, of course, assuming that the thing that we want to do now is a good and right thing, yes, of course, there can be a collection of people that are bad and want to do bad things, and they would do the opposite of what we did. That's always the case. It has no bearing on whether a particular action, a particular law, or something should be passed. It's always the case that enough bad people can get together, maybe, to pass a regulation, a law, whatever, that's bad. The objection in its other division refers to the damage which ensues to Christianity when any particular church, more properly called a sect, or we would say today denomination, is favored above other sects or denominations with a legal establishment. But we answer such a sectarian establishment or denominational establishment. This is really important here. You need to follow this closely, right? Because uh, generally speaking today, we don't understand that First Amendment at all today. We don't understand it at all. But we answer such a sectarian or denominational establishment is forbidden in express terms in our Constitution, is contrary to the genius of our people, and is not now demanded by any of our most earnest Protestant sects or denominations. Right? So what's he referring to? I mean, how is it forbidden? Well, Article 1, Amendment 1, Bill of Right number 1. Congress shall make no law prohibiting the practice, establishing religion. Okay. I said it all wrong. I feel a little bit like Joe Biden at that point. Sorry. You know the thing. But um, yeah, that part of the First Amendment, it's directed at Congress. It's not directed at any other level of government. It's not directed at state government, at county government, at city government. It's directed to Congress, and Congress lives in one place, and that's in today, Washington, D.C. We have the Capitol building, right? That's where Congress lives. It's where the Senate and House of Representatives meet and do their thing. And while they're there doing their thing, Now, notice how this pastor, this is 1874, right? Uh, those Bill of Rights were part of the 1789, 1791 amendments to the Constitution. In 1874, he understands that when it says religion, it means Christianity. He's not talking about anything other than denominations or different strains of Christianity. This might rub up against your idea of the whole word pluralistic society, blah blah blah. Right? We're neutral when it comes to religion, blah blah blah. Um, no, no. Um, it's um, it's Christianity. That's what's embodied in that word in the First Amendment, religion, Christianity. Now, I imagine it'll be really sparse, the number of people that if you were to ask them in that First Amendment, when it talks about religion, is it referring to any particular religion? Oh, no, 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 no. It's all religions. And no, it's not. It's not. For them to say religion was to say Christianity. And so our pastor's pointing out, look, we have a constitution that says, no, you don't get to Congress, you don't get to establish a denomination as the church of the country. He says it's contrary to the genius of our people. He held the people in high regard. Look, we're smart people. We know that we shouldn't have a national denomination. And he points out just the honest truth that there's no Protestant denomination that is demanding to be named the national church. In fact, my guess would be that any Protestant denomination, should such a discussion come up, any Protestant denomination would have said at the time, no, no, thank you. No, that's not the way this works. In the spirit of George Washington, no, you will not make us the king church of the country. Now, our pastor continues, its evil workings are too evident in other lands and other governments, where already it begins to wax old and is ready to vanish away. Moreover, our whole experience in state churches. Now, notice what he's going to say here. Our whole experience in state churches, Episcopacy in Virginia, Congregationalism in parts of New England, has so thoroughly enlightened us on that point that now, for more than a generation, such civil maintenance of any sect or denomination has been our abhorrence in the interest of both statesmanship and religion. And so what he's saying is that everybody knew, right, that First Amendment was passed and that Congress wasn't going to be busy about naming a particular denomination as the denomination of the nation. But in the various states, um, most, not sure if it was all, had a state church. Had a state church. And nobody ran around saying, oh, the First Amendment's been approved. You can't have a state church. Why? Why didn't they do that? Well, because they knew. They knew that First Amendment applied to Congress and Congress only. But what the pastor is saying that as time went by, even the states came to realize that, this is maybe not the best scenario, right? I don't know what kind of pressures were applied, but states made their own decisions to say, let's just drop the whole state church business, right? The whole business of you have to be a member of the Episcopal Church in order to hold office in the state, or things like that, and they stepped away from it. But that was their decision, done in their time by their people, right? Nobody, as far as I know, and I'm pretty confident in this, nobody's running around saying, well, the First Amendment says. Um, I'm far from advocating any, even the least administration of any, even the best ecclesiasticism in our civil government. Right? So it seems to me like at that point he's saying, I'm not asking that the civil government either conduct itself or demand that churches conduct themselves according to some preferred form of government, church government. But it seems to be continually forgotten that there is a Christianity back of denominations, deep below all ecclesiastical organisms. Will you make Christ a sectarian? Was he an ecclesiastic? Did he wear clerical robes? Had he a cathedral or even a solemn Puritan meeting house? What documentary organization had he for a church, even up to the day when the great gates of the heavens lifted themselves on high at the glory of his ascension? The subsequent ecclesiastical organizations are good enough in their place and for their work. We do well to work in fidelity with them as instruments, but they are not Christianity itself. Okay, this is really um, parsing discussion here, right? And he is saying that Christianity is not Baptists, or let's not use Baptists. Let's say Christianity is not congregational form of government. Christianity is not in and of itself Presbyterian form, or it's not Episcopalian form. And whatever church government is set upon, that's not Christianity, right? That's a decision that's made by whatever appointed leaders are determining how a local church is going to function. And so what the pastor here is saying is that there is a Christianity because there is a Christ who exists behind all those denominations. And if we're doing our Christianity well, the Christ that the Congregational Church serves is the same Christ that the Presbyterian Church serves, is the same Christ that the Episcopalian Church observes. There is one Christ, one Savior, one Lord of all. So our pastor says Christ exists, a grand underlying fact in all history, a present living force in all society, and the substratum of Christian fact, belief, and precept, resting on the Bible for historical charter, but having its divine and essential charter in human nature itself, having produced the Bible rather than having produced by it, recognized in all Christian organizations, common to all sects. This is Christianity proper. Okay, so I would take that. I feel like he got a little bit muddled there, but I don't know if I feel like that. I think he got a little bit muddled there. That's my thought regarding what we just read there. But I would take that to say, um, as Christianity formed itself in the apostolic and coming out of the apostolic age, um, what they, by divine providence, what came forth was the Bible as we know it today, the 66 books of the Old and New Testament, right? What didn't come forth was um, the Baptist Church and the Presbyterian Church and the first church of the fishermen, or whatever whatever labels. There is no um, vineyard church or non-denoms, right? Um, those denominational names come much, 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 much later in history, and really, I think initially just ways to identify different groups based on particular emphases they might have regarding some aspect of the Christian faith. Um, and oftentimes those branches were a reaction to something that was believed to be off kilter, out of line, aberrant, or worse in the existing churches of the time. So this is Christianity proper. This is that which is divine in origin and divine in power, and should as such be recognized and administered under due checks and safeguards by this and every other government on the face of the earth. If individuals choose to add to this the various rules of wise and good men, some decrees of popes or councils, edifying forms of worship, a scientific development and adjustment of doctrine and creed, they have liberty so to do. Yet, so far as they do this, they are reducing their Christianity from the ecumenical to the provincial, from the eternal to the temporary, thus perhaps gaining some facilities of access to men in certain periods of history, or perhaps shutting themselves within their little sectarian sheds, which do not stand fully within, but only lean against the grand age-defying structure of the common Christianity. All right, so he seems to be arguing that there's a core Christian doctrine that should never be forgotten, should always be remembered, and should form the core of whatever Christian group exists. They should wholly and fully embrace this core, right? And I think in our time we call them um, maybe cardinal doctrines or essential doctrines, right? That and you have a sense of this, right, in your day-to-day life when you meet up with others that you don't know, but they profess themselves to be Christian. And when you hear encouraging ideas or phrases like they express belief in the Trinity, they express belief that Jesus Christ is divine, um, and those things that are essential to our Christian faith, then you're encouraged by that. And maybe, when they express um, some other beliefs that they hold, and you recognize that, okay, those aren't essential. I differ with them on that, but since it's not an essential doctrine, I do not separate with them based on that. At least entirely separate, right? Now, maybe it's as a secondary doctrine, it's significant enough so that you feel the need to attend a different church that embraces that secondary doctrine the way you do, as opposed to their church. Um, but it's not a sufficient enough separation to say that you wouldn't break bread with them, right? Um, or that, if they invited you to their church, that you would say, well, I just can't go, right? That sort of thing. Um, and so I think what our pastor is saying, the that core of Christianity, that is what um, the government should feel free to administer. So what would be that core of Christianity? Well, um, I'll go out on a limb here and I'll say that um, a core among Protestant churches, since this nation was really born out of the Reformation, and so the reformers are known as the Protesters, the Protestants, and that's how we get the Protestant churches, right? I would say one of the core ideas is that the command to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy has been regenerated, made anew in the observance of the Lord's Day, right? And so our author, our pastor, I'm sure would say, I hope he will. I hope he doesn't contradict me later on in this, but I'm sure would say that laws that businesses will be closed on Sunday is the administration of Christianity, and it's not the administration of a particular denomination. And we know that to be true because um, Protestant churches meet on Sundays. Protestant churches um, elevate and worship Jesus Christ. And so um, the national government expressing the date of documents as in the year of our Lord, they're administering Christianity. Okay, but whether they be wise or foolish in this, the government has no concern in them except to keep itself free from them, to protect them in any decent use of their liberty, and to prevent their interfering with each other to any breakage of the public peace. All right, so take modes of baptism, okay? Is it dunking? Is it sprinkling? Is it whole body immersion? Um, is it squirting? I don't know, whatever the mode is. And, I think pouring, okay? I think that um, there can be a case made for particular modes, but, um, we don't. We don't expect Baptists to be breaking into Presbyterian churches and stopping their baptisms there. It's not decent in order. And in fact, we would anticipate that our governments in administering Christianity would have things in place to ensure that that doesn't happen. That we don't have protests. We don't have Presbyterians going and throwing rocks through the glass windows of the Baptist church because they're practicing full immersion, or they're practicing um, believer only worship or baptism, and they're not baptizing infants, right? And so the Presbyterians are up in arms and protesting, and we would anticipate our civil sphere, because we anticipate them to administer Christianity, we would expect them to administer things in such a way as to say, stop it. Okay. That's inappropriate protest. That's infringing upon the practice of Christianity, right? Besides introducing disturbing of the peace and disorder. And so stop it. This indifference to denominations and recognition of the common Christianity and law is our present, as it has been in the main our past governmental principle. What reason for any change except to give the principle such wiser development in methods as growing light and experience may suggest? Right. So yeah, he's saying like, why we've been doing it this way. Why is there this insistence that we step away from doing this? This, in fact, is what's needed to ensure that Christianity has its peaceful space in which to operate and to evangelize, to draw men unto the Lord. Right? Because the foundations of our society, the spiritual and emotional and mental wellness of our people, the opportunities for um, success in employment and productivity, the um, reduction in crime, whether nonviolent or violent. I mean, those are all rooted in the continued practice of Christianity and the allowing the space for Christianity to become the conscience of the community, whether individuals are Christian or not personally. It should be the norm in our communities that, some knucklehead kid is thinking about doing something that's unethical, immoral, perhaps criminal, and that the thought would come to them, wow, my neighborhood pastor is going to be so ashamed of me if I do this thing. I don't want him to be ashamed of me. That should be a regular occurrence in the thoughts of the children in a neighborhood. Although I don't know that we really have neighborhood churches so much anymore. But um, yeah, I mean that should be um, this was a reason why, particularly in medieval times, but even in colonial times, right? The church was given a tall spire so that that spire could be seen from a distance and it could serve as a reminder to people about how are you conducting yourself? How are you behaving? Right? Because it would be the cultural practice, okay? It would be like, this is the culture that we should be preserving, that on Sunday you go to church. And if you were behaving improperly, unchristianly during the week, part of the idea was that when you would get to church, you would be convicted because the holy man, the preacher, the pastor, would be standing before you. And you would have eyes of righteous judgment, but a heart of um, a positive outlook upon you, right? Knowing that through regeneration by the Holy Spirit, what the kind of life that you ought to be living, but still acknowledging the presence of a sinful nature and the consequences of that we wrestle with. And that there would be some shamefacedness in we congregants as we sit before this pastor and he speaks about God's truth and he declares God's law and he follows that with the glorious message of the gospel, the good news. And the congregants would be shamefaced knowing that this week I've not done as I should have, as I ought to have done. And the point is, with our pastor is saying here is that the government should be administering Christianity so that sort of thing can happen in a community. All right. And so, think about how the the church, the neighborhood pastors, the conscience is so overwhelmed by all the stuff that goes on Sundays that we indulge in, we embrace. It breaks the public peace because of that. Um, this indifferent, yeah. So let's see. We're now to objection 5. This, it is answered, is the reason for a change. Any civil recognition and administration of Christianity invades private conscience and the liberty of the individual. Right. And our pastor says, why, it is urged, should the Jew or the atheist be compelled to live under a government which plants itself in antagonism to his belief? I answer, he's not so compelled. The world is wide. All the continents and seas lie open. There go the ships. If any man prefer a godless government and can find one under heaven, he's not restrained from going there and from finding there a larger liberty, a surer protection for life and property, and nobler education for his children than he can find here under Christian laws. It's just a completely different country than what we live in today. But wouldn't it be pleasant if this was the argument? Because we do have times where people will say, well, if you don't like it here, go live in another country. Go back home to where you live, right? In other words, stop trying to make us the way you want. Stop trying to make our divinely ordained institution in your image when we established it in God's image. Right? Like what? But we are this way, aren't we? I mean, we start attending a new church and we think, oh, this is nice, this is wonderful, but wow, it'd be great if you guys would do things this way. And then we try to get that church to change to be the way we want it to be, right? We get mad when they don't, and because they're like, "What are you doing?" We've worked long and hard to establish our church here and the way that we function and how we do things and what, how we prioritize things. And now you come in in a month, you want us to change the color of the pews or, whatever you're demanding. And it's like, look, you're welcome. We'd love to have you be a part of our church and attend and fellowship with us. But if you really feel the need that things be run differently than we're doing here, um, maybe you just need to go to another church. There's a lot of churches out there. Go find a church that is more amenable to your ideas of how it functions in those ways. I do believe our author's being sarcastic here when he's suggesting that you can go find a godless government that is going to provide larger liberty and surer protection for life and property and nobler education. The sarcasm should not be missed there. He may be quite a traveler before he finds his home. He may now and then find his chosen government vanishing from around him in the fiery storm of revolution or dissolving in a sea of human gore. But he has liberty. You can go to France and risk getting your head chopped off in the French Revolution, or you can go to Russia and risk being thrown in the gulag, or um, abandoned to Siberia there. You can go to Cambodia, but there's a Pol Pot that has his killing fields, right? You can go to China, and they have their re-education programs, right? Like those options are out there. Travel, you have the liberty to travel and find the country that matches your desires. You don't, right? You don't have to you know be stuck with the alphabets that have the English alphabet, I guess. Maybe you can find a cereal that has the Greek alphabet. I don't know. But, the point is, um, stop demanding that the government under which you are currently living entirely change itself from the foundations upon which it was built to satisfy your desires. But indeed, this reply, like the question, touches the surface only. We may set forth the objection by parodying it thus in the political sphere. Why should a monarchist, an imperialist, a communist be compelled to live under a government which plants itself in antagonism to his political beliefs? Why? Because it is good for him and for all of us and can be proved good by reflection, observation, and experience. So look at what our pastor's done. There's just so much wisdom in pastoral counsel, right? First he said, look, you don't have to live under this government. If the government as established upon its Christian foundations and administering Christianity as it was intended to be bothers you, take out the globe. It's pretty big world that we have. There's a lot of places, there's a lot of countries out there that have all varying forms of government. Go shopping and find one. But then the pastor says, but that's a surface only answer. So why would these demonstrably shown inadequate, inappropriate forms of government, why should people who hold to those be compelled to live under government which plants itself in antagonism to their political beliefs? Well, because it's good for you. It's good for you. I mean, that's like saying, why should people have to listen to the teachings of Christianity? And you can say, well, you don't have to. The teachings of all manner of false religions and paganism and atheism and Satanism, frankly, are out there in the marketplace. So you're welcome. You're welcome to go shopping and buy any of those instructions. That's surface only. The real reason why you should be submitted to the the teaching of Christianity, the instruction in Christianity, is because it's good for you. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. It's good for you. Let's see what our author says here. No government could stand the day which undertook to stand on all the metaphysical and historical theories which are spun out of human brains. Communistic speculations in politics, atheistic speculations in religion may be very bright and ingenious, but a civil state must stand not on cobwebs, but on some solid facts, commending themselves to the test of experience. Well, this is interesting. I mean, we kind of have a contemporary example of what's being said here, right? We have a recently elected mayor who, having promised that there are going to be all these free things, right, has now resorted to asking people to continue sending in money because we've got to get these free things put in place. Like, what? I thought they were free. I guess they're not, well, they're not free to get started, right? Once you pay for them, then they're free, right? It's like the grocery store that announces their big buy one, get one free, but the price of the one is now equal to what used to be the price of two. All right. I believe we got something coming up here that is of importance. It is a pregnant sentence of John Adams in his Defense of the Constitution, Volume 2, page 14. The United States of America calculated their governments for more than 10 years. Hmm. Calculated their governments for more than 10 years. Yeah, more than 10 years. What is he saying? What he is saying is that these colonies did not declare their independence. And then the day after that, oh man, we're independent now. What should our government do? What should our government be like? No, they've been practicing the government that they would rely upon as they became free and independent states. They'd already been practicing that government. That's what he's saying. Moreover, in this new tenderness for every man's conscience, is the Christian's conscience to have no care? I have as much conscience as an atheist, or if that be boasting, I have as good a legal right to my little conscience as he to his grand one, and I protest that my conscience will be grievously wounded if this government, having been Christian from the start, now plunges into some foaming, tumbling sea of godlessness. Therefore, we are ready for the real answer to the common objection regarding the invasion of liberty and of individual conscience, which answer consists in granting fully the fact stated by the objection, and then asserting that this, instead of being a fault in the government, is itself the indispensable thing in any conceivable government. President Washington, in his letter to Congress on the adoption of the Constitution, writes, individuals entering into society must give up a share of liberty to preserve the rest. The Patriots' answer fits the modern cry. It is the essence of government to limit individual liberty for the general good. Unless through some process of such limitation, no government is possible. So I wish I could find it again. I used to have in my files a wonderful, wonderful book that kind of followed the Robinson Crusoe story, kind of, to teach about government and economics. Older book. And it talked about, the man that's first stranded on an island, right? He's all alone and he has full liberty on that island. Everything is available to him. He doesn't have to ask permission from anybody. He doesn't have to worry about stepping on anybody's toes, anything like that. It's just all there. The whole island is for him. And then it posits that another person is shipwrecked and comes to that island, and the two agree that they'll live together on the island. And in that agreement, by saying that they will live together, the liberty of the first person, which used to be entire, the whole island, is now necessarily limited for the sake of living in community. And it goes that, as I recall the book, it goes on to express the the fact that for the first shipwrecked person, he doesn't view this as a negative. He understands that the restriction of his liberty is what is adjusted so that he has companionship, friendship, communication, interaction with another human, which he didn't have before, right? But to facilitate that good and friendly relations with another person, right? He now has to think about, okay, that apple tree, is it mine or his, right? Where is the property line, right? Where is his house as opposed to my house? His land as opposed to, right? He has to start thinking about those restrictions on liberty. But those restrictions on liberty go as far as is necessary to promote what? The common good, the general welfare, the communication between the two, the opportunity to for one to grow cabbages and the other to grow cows, and they can exchange freely, voluntarily. If men are to come together and organize communities, some general adjustments and compromises of powers and rights must be made. And a forcible writer has remarked, it is not difficult to adjust the question of individual rights if we but remember that no man can exercise what he may be pleased to term a right of conscience whenever such exercise shall endanger the prosperity of the state. Our courts of law have held this principle to be correct, and in accordance with the rights of conscience as they are affirmed in the Constitution. Even Mr. Jefferson, great champion as he was of civil liberty, and no great champion of Christianity, acknowledged it. Society which, okay, let me back up for a moment. It says here, no great champion of Christianity, right? And I suppose that's true. I don't know. I think I've said before here, or maybe in other places, but Jefferson called himself a Christian. I think his expressed understanding of Christianity is maybe a little bit suspect. His granddaughter defended his Christianity quite vigorously. Um, so, right, in terms of being a champion for Christianity, as far as faithfully preaching the gospel, yeah, maybe Jefferson is not that. But in terms of being a champion of Christianity, being um, foundational to this nation and essential for um, the greatest enjoyment of liberty, he may be a better champion than most Christians today. All right. Society, which governmentally is paramount to the individual, has the right of self-preservation, and therefore it refuses to grant individuals a liberty subversive of the public liberty. And on the same principle, refuses to let religious liberty be pressed in any separate case to its own general subversion. On this point, hear Mr. Webster, and I'm sure this is Daniel Webster, not my favorite Webster, Noah Webster. Individual choice in religion may be as subversive of public freedom as individual choice in anything else. The very end of civil government is to restrain individual choice. That's like kind of a hard sentence to receive. Let's get the whole context here, at least the context given to us. The state must take its ground upon its religion, on its own responsibility, and then carry out its government in subordinating individual choices, religious or otherwise. Okay, so let's think about this for a moment. I think what's being discussed here is similar to what I bring up with students often because I want them to be thinking about this. Because I often hear it said that, well, people, well, particularly adults, they should be free to live however they want. And, well, no, they shouldn't be free to live however they want, right? And people who make that claim, right, when they make the claim, what is unspoken are certain boundaries or guardrails to what they're suggesting, right? Because they don't literally mean that adults should be able to live whatever way they want. Because if they did, there wouldn't be such an uproar over things like the Epstein files. Because why wouldn't, when those things come out, why wouldn't we say, well, people should be free to live however they want? Um, you know, Even in the midst of our depravity, there's still some sense of, well, that's not right. People can't live there. Now, in our a really sad testimony in our day and age is that um, it seems like the majority of people don't shudder at all at the thought of the horrors of abortion and the millions that this country has led to the slaughterhouse through that depraved practice. I mean, this nation, in that regard, is ranked with the most evil, murderous dictators in history, maybe worse. And yet, we think we're such civilized people that whenever we hear about violence done to dogs in particular, people just shudder at that, like, oh, people can sit through a movie that depicts the killing of tens of people, you know, but the moment a dog is killed, that's when the audience gasps. Like, what's wrong with us? Like, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have any reaction to a dog being killed, right? We should have a reaction to killing that is unjustified and such. But yeah, so we even though we say people should be free to live however they want, we don't really mean that. Um, because there's some behaviors that we think are people shouldn't be able to live that way. And for some of those behaviors that we think about that, we're right. And what the author is saying here is that, so there are, when it comes to choices, the way in which somebody lives, the particular things that somebody does, it's appropriate for the state to step in and say, well, no, you can do this, but you can't do that. Because once you do that, whatever that is, right? Well, now you've taken an action that is disruptive to the common welfare, or the general welfare, the common peace, the orderliness of our society and culture. And so we should have communities that say you can't have an abortion. Okay. And when the objections come up, well, if you don't allow women to have access to safe abortions, they're going to go into the back alleys to do those things. And the proper response is, yeah, that's right. Anybody who contemplates committing that sort of an act should have to go find a dark, damp, dirty alley to perform such a wicked deed. Those are exactly the kinds of deeds that are to be done in the black of darkness. And it's appropriate for the state to step in and, I think what our author is saying, step in on the grounds of Christianity and saying, no, you don't do these things. And so, when people are going to make the argument, well, hey, if you start administering Christianity, then you're invading people's consciences. Like, and that's new, right? It's not a question of whether or not government's going to invade the consciences of people. It's in what way, in what manner, and what tools are they going to invade that conscience, right? Are they going to invade that conscience in such a way as to shore up the guardrails to keep that conscience confined within a moral and ethical framework of choices that they make, or not? This whole objection to a governmental Christianity as invading individual rights must yet be dealt with respectfully, so far as it arises in the minds of our friends from old countries beyond the seas, where republicanism, and that's not the Republican Party, that's the form of government, has been known but as a wild theory or as a beautiful dream, and where Christianity has been known only as developed in that enginery of misrule, a state church. Okay, so he's cautioning about what's coming from the old world, from Europe at this time. Think about how things developed there. They've developed not to the point where they've developed here. These newcomers will make good Americans yet, right? So these these immigrants who come here, they'll be fine. They can be, as they assimilate, right? As you know, as strangers who have come here, and the expectation is that they take on our laws and customs as their own. That's what the stranger is to do. Read your Old Testament. That's what the stranger is to do, is to take on um, the customs and the laws and, dare I say, the religion of the country to which they are now calling home. Read the book of Ruth. Um, you know, pretty interesting declaration that is made there, a declaration of assimilation to a new country, right? Consider Solomon and the lack of assimilation that occurred there, right? So these newcomers will make good Americans yet. Our fathers were foreigners and experienced as they, but for the demagogues indigenous to our soil who devote themselves to the stirring up into faction this honest but hasty zeal for liberty, let there be confusion. They are dancing with blazing torches in a powder magazine. That's probably a good sentence for your commonplace book, right? That's a good one to remember when you see somebody that's getting out of control. Parents, use this on your sons when you see them getting rowdy, right? Son, you're dancing with a blazing torch in a powder magazine. Um, Yet this objection may well suggest to us a caution. In the application of these clear, strong principles, there should be provided the most careful and systematic checks against persecution and intolerance, which indeed are utterly unchristian. Christians should avoid giving offense. They can afford to be patient, for they know that Christ shall inherit all lands. I'll just let you consider what kind of eschatological view would have this kind of a statement. They should hold all men of whatever belief or unbelief in reverence for the sake of Christ, who is the head of our common humanity. They should use tact and gentleness and be ready to yield for the sake of peace, everything of personal taste, theory, preference. Then, in any trying hour, they can plant themselves with all the firmer stand on the deep rock of the principle that God and his Son, the Christ, have right in this government and must not be cast out. The demands of the Church of Rome itself, aloof from other Christians, may seem to complicate our problem. Yet why may not clear principles applied in the gentle methods solve this difficulty also? So at this point, he's even suggesting that the Roman Catholic Church presents some issues. Protestants may have their own theological opinions of the evils of Romanism, but to the government, the Church of Rome is neither more nor less than one among many other Christian sects or churches, and must be regarded with neither less nor more favor than they receive. To rule out the Bible by law from any department of governmental action, to rule out the common charter of Christendom as a sectarian book, would be to declare Christianity sectarian. That point, therefore, cannot be yielded in general or state law. While municipal law may, perhaps, be left not to prohibit the Bible, but to some partial, temporary, exceptional dispensing with its use as expediency may suggest. Expediency may suggest the reading of selections from the Bible in public schools, or perhaps the admission of the Douay version for some localities. The Douay version would be the Roman Catholic version, a version having many points of striking excellence. These suggestions may be received with a sneer as not meeting the strong demands of the Romish priesthood. But that is no fault of the state and will suffice only to put that denomination of Christians in the wrong openly before the public eyes. The state must proceed on its ancient long-tested, beneficent principle, swerved by no outcries or theories of faction or sect. Okay, so you'll notice that when it came to more particulars about, for example, how the Bible is going to be used in the public school or government school, we might say, notice that that came to municipal law or community, like the city, like the local, right? That this was for the local people to decide. This was not to be dictated from even the state level, certainly not the national level. When he came to these particulars, right? The suggestion that the reading of selections from the Bible, and so you could imagine that maybe the Sermon on the Mount or the Beatitudes, right? Particular section, the love chapter, right? Particular selections from the Bible would be suggested. Oh, those are good things to read, and maybe a local community would agree that, right? If we have those readings of the Bible, it's not it's not putting to shame any one denomination as opposed to another, or elevating one denomination over others. It's all denominations can agree on the Sermon on the Mount or some such thing, right? But again, it was at the local community level where those particulars were being decided. What was to be asserted from the higher levels of government was to not rule out the Bible, right? Because by ruling out the Bible at some higher level, this is going to suggest that the Bible is somehow sectarian, and it's not. The Bible is the book of Christianity, and Christianity is the religion of the state. Therefore, the Bible is to be highly regarded, to be respected, to as governments did early on, governments purchased and dispensed the Bible. Why? Because it's the book of the religion of the government. Now, one of the things about this section that maybe makes it a little less intriguing for us now, but I mean, it's a little more particular on relations between the Protestant churches and the Roman Catholic Church, and some of the feelings that were there about that. So, all right, I'm trying to find a good place to stop here because I see that we're approaching the 2-hour mark. But it's time that this discussion closed. Oh, well, here we go. I cannot, however, take leave of as all good pastors. In conclusion, and then he goes on. I cannot, however, take leave of the subject without summing up in a general statement of practical duty the principles which it has now been attempted to maintain. Okay. It is the duty of governments no less than of individuals to recognize, obey, and honor Almighty God. Men passing from the sphere of their personal action to that of their social, political, civil action do not thereby pass from under their obligation to their creator and universal sovereign. Okay, so think about how significant this is for his audience, made up in part, maybe mostly, individuals who have been elected to office, right? And so essentially what he's saying to them here is, you're personally a Christian. Don't abandon that. Don't think that you're no longer obligated to Almighty God, your obedience, your honor, your recognition of Almighty God, just because you're now in political office. To leave God behind is to leave humanity behind. There is a corporate life of nations equally under a divine charter with the individual life of the soul, and which depends for its sustenance, security, and beauty on the continual inflow of divine and spiritual forces. It may be said that the problem before us is a difficult and delicate one, having its peculiar perils, that to solve it on this principle would practically tend to embroil our public life and to either work or seem to work an oppression, and that therefore it is expedient, disregarding all theories, to cut the state loose from religion. But it is expedient to do right. That a duty is difficult and dangerous is the reason that cowards assign for its neglect. Meanwhile, the duty awaits. It is not for preachers, but for our wisest jurists to decide upon the methods of applying this principle which will be safest and will hold in highest adjustment the many public and private rights involved. If no way now seem open to us in which to move as a Christian nationality, then it will be wise for our great thinkers and our largest practical men to find or make a way speedily. For we may be sure that though a nation may announce that it has no official relation with Almighty God, it will discover as God's swift centuries fly that he has very special official relations with it. Divine providence has a fashion of throwing away governments that refuse to join in God's beneficent work for man. You can find their fragments as a potter's vessels scattered along the whole track of man from the gates of Eden down. We may be sure that though a nation may announce that it has no official relation with Almighty God, it will discover as God's swift centuries fly that he has very special official relations with it. That's powerful. That is powerful. I mean, as a nation, we need to hear these words again. But of course, we have to believe that there is a divine providence, right? If we just completely disregard, there is no God, there's no Almighty God, there's no exercise of divine providence, blah, 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 blah. Right? Then these words are meaningless. Doesn't mean they're not true, though, right? Just because I frame my paradigm of thinking in such a way as to make these words meaningless doesn't mean that I've made them untrue, right? See where we're at here. We're on page 47. Oh, we are so close. We are so close. Yeah, so it does go to, well, yeah, we've gone about an hour at 40, so we better wrap it up for now. And so it looks to me like next Wednesday will be our opportunity to finish our Christianity and national law. And at this point, um, his assertions are meaty enough, weighty enough that for a um, thoughtful Christian, you have to be persuaded. And even if the particulars of his arguments are like, I'm not sure I understand, and there are clearly points where understanding what exactly is meant or how exactly that works is difficult to know. And he acknowledges that in some circumstances, it will be left to the wisdom of these elected officials to find a way uh, to administer Christianity in every aspect of the civil government. Um, but when he comes to a statement like this, all these, if you think on an individual basis, there's a lot of people that run around in one way or another making the claim, well, I don't have a relationship with God. Well, he has a relationship with you, right? Generally speaking, there's two relationships that any individual can have with God. One is that God can be smiling at that person. The other is that he can have a countenance of wrath towards that person. Like and I'm just going to suggest that God smiling on you is far better. And you can divert your eyes and pretend like there's not a countenance of wrath towards you, um, but that doesn't make it so. um, right? You can whistle in the dark, pretending it's not dark, but it's still dark, right? We can pretend like as a nation, like, hey, everything's okay. We have no official relation with Almighty God. Everything's okay. Everything's fine. But as our pastor here is saying, we'll learn, right? We'll learn. I mean, effectively, our pastor here is saying the same thing that the man he declared who was not a champion of Christianity, Thomas Jefferson, said. Just go to Washington, D.C., go to the Jefferson Memorial. If you're on the side of it that is, as I remember it, facing, towards the reflecting pool and such, um, as you walk in and you're looking at the face of Jefferson on the magnificent statue in the center, turn towards your left and look behind and read the quote. And you'll read the quote of a man who trembled with fear, knowing that God's justice comes against nations. He was saying the same thing. All right. Let's remember that we're at page 47. We're at the bottom of page 47 as we're excited because next week, next Wednesday, will be our opportunity to finish this sermon. And so we'll have to find out what's next in our stack of reading for Wednesdays. Thanks for being a part and watching the video and sharing it with all of your friends and not so friends and whomever. And, hit the like button or, all that, do all that stuff, right? Um, I think these are powerful words that um, Americans need to be reminded of. So maybe this isn't the best way for us to be reminded. Maybe I'm not the best expositor of these things, but um, yeah, share the video, let others know, and see if we can't build a group of individuals that embrace the idea of Christianity a national law and not be ashamed of it, right? But espouse it and let Christianity out of the cage and let it defend itself, right? Again, no random cast this week. I think tomorrow there'll be a special video on the random cast posted that'll have to do with Thanksgiving. Next week, the full slate. Tuesday night, Lantern's Quest, back in the Gospel of Mark. Wednesday night, another midweek study, finishing up this sermon. And Friday night, a random cast. And quite possibly, Monday night, History Done Right. History Done Right on Monday night. I need to come up with a song for that or something. Anyway, possibly. Don't get angry with me if it doesn't happen, but we'll see if we can't get that started on Monday. Again, thanks for being a part. Check out Bradford Christian College. It might be the college for you or a college that you could recommend to someone else. And please do join us for this podcast next week and any of our other podcasts during the course of the week that might be beneficial to you. And please recommend us to friends, family, whomever, as a good listen, a good view. You all have a good night. Have a happy Thanksgiving this week, and we'll see